say $120. Or I could settle for $80,000 right now from the court, have the court's imprimatur stamped on there, and I could go and enforce this within 28 days. You can see the sort of toing and froing about the attractiveness of that. You'd go, well, the client will be happy if I'm not sending them letters constantly about what their views about costs are, or I'm writing further letters to a cost assessor. But we could get more in that context, but it may be more painful and perhaps more painless in this context of getting an order from the judge. So you've got this fluctuating scenario where you go, well, what's the better alternative between those two? And if you can persuade the judge of fixing those cost orders, it really ends the debate then and there, and saves a lot of time. But as I say, the caveat I put in all this is these are applications that are often made where there is serious unreasonableness by the other party in terms of their conduct that would warrant that, and more likely than not, an incapacity or a person being incapable of paying the cost orders if they were made against them on a cost assessment. If the party's been intentionally protracted with their discussions or have engaged in delaying tactics, that's also a further support for it, but the court needs to be aware of the utility of cost assessment, which they invariably are, and they are less likely to award lump sum cost orders, but it's available under Section 98 4C. So in relation to what you prepare for a lump sum cost order, I mentioned earlier about your affidavit of costs. That's where that becomes incredibly relevant. That you're saying to the court, there are certain juniors that assisted in the case, or the partner only supervised briefly, or it's been a sole practitioner in a matter, and there's been various hours that haven't been included on invoices and the like. These are factors that you make submissions to the court about, but the court wants to know what were the costs throughout this process, and how does the cascading regime work, and then factoring in the logical, fair and reasonable estimation of costs for a particular matter. If it was a very hard one, you're more likely to get a higher award of costs. If it's somewhat straightforward, but a party's been unreasonable in their dealings with you, it'll be reduced somewhat as well. So, getting to that point, I think if there's going to be any takeaways that you can deduce from today's paper, it's this. First is this: whenever you start proceedings or you're defending proceedings, constantly be aware of the utility of making offers. It's not a sign of weakness. In fact, it's a strategic move that you should deploy, because it will give your client dividends if they're successful, and if you're right about the strengths or weaknesses of a case at a certain point in time. So always make them. And there are pros and cons all the time between offers of compromise and quarterbanks. There's a fantastic paper that former Justice Margaret Beasley, now the Governor of New South Wales, wrote 2 papers on quarterbank offers and offers of compromise. Read them. They're useful resources. But really and truly, there are different contexts for the rules offer versus an informal offer. They have different purposes. If you are wanting to make an application for an indemnity cost order, and it's unclear how the court will go once judgment's been in your client's favour, be prepared for it. The preparation involves those 2 affidavits. 1, the next in the offers, and 2, if you're so bold and think it's an appropriate case for it, prepare a cost affidavit that explains what your costs are, a way in which the court can then calculate from the date of an offer is made, and if it's rejected, what those percentages might be. And obviously, I think that the main point to take with a cost application is know the limits as well of your audience. You may have had 2 wins already, and 3 or 4 might be coming your way, but just be conscious of managing expectations in that way. That even though things are looking very good, you might then put the judge offside in your application, and things might not be going very well after that. And I think the last point to be made with that is, if you're running cases in the local court, read the practice note. It's actually quite a different document in terms of what we're all used to in terms of costs. It will form an assumption that costs follow the event no matter what. The local court has put into its own system ways to navigate proceedings that are blown out of control with costs, and even though those claims that have been issued are not particularly large, so be mindful of that. And I think the main part with all this is manage expectations the best you can for those applications. It's so discretionary, and no matter whether the building blocks are there, it needs to be something that the court would consider more likely than not of a cost order in your client's favour on an indemnity basis, but the reality is it's so subjective on one view that it may not result in that outcome.